Hey everyone, Ginger Soda here. Welcome back to another Fallout 76 video. And today I wanted to talk about Fallout 76's Endgame and how it's really unique in comparison to other games. Since the beginning of Fallout 76, people in the community have been asking for more Endgame content, and that's Endgame in air quotes. Now, before we talk about Fallout 76's Endgame, I feel like it's important to kind of set some ground rules as to what Endgame really means when it comes to MMORPGs that Fallout is. As the term Endgame implies, this is content that is done in games towards the end. Usually tends to be higher level areas or dungeons that are completed for higher tier rewards. This is often seen in games such as World of Warcraft, New World, or the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, the interesting thing for Fallout 76 is that its endgame content has had kind of multiple different phases, whether it be prior to Wastelanders, following Wastelanders, and the addition of things like daily ops and expeditions. Now, initially, daily ops and expeditions seemed to fit into the category of endgame content, except for me, when I go back and look at it, the rewards and the experience itself isn't really high tier quality gameplay. Now, what I mean by that is that the loot is shit and the enemies are not difficult. The main thing with daily ops that can make it difficult to complete is the time limit that you're on. If you want to get the best rewards possible, which would be the rare schematics that you can get, you have to complete it under 8 minutes. Now, if you have a team of 4, you can run through daily ops in 8 minutes easily. I've had multiple times where I have it done in less than 5 minutes. And that issue kind of transfers over to expeditions, where the content's not really difficult at all, while it does take a bit longer to complete than daily ops because you're following a quest line. The loot and the enemy difficulty, it's not worth the time that it takes to complete or to get to that point to be able to actually do the content. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think Fallout 76's additions of daily ops and expeditions were very, very essential for the game to get to the state that it currently is at. I just feel like at the end of the day, it's still very lackluster content that doesn't really bring a lot to the table. Now, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, Fallout 76's endgame is kind of split into some different categories, whether it's before Wastelanders came out or after Wastelanders came out. Now, if we look at before Wastelanders, the primary endgame content was the launching of the nukes, and as you can see in the video right now, the fighting of the Scorchbeast Queen. Now, this is still currently one of the best methods for doing endgame stuff. Getting the legendaries as well as getting the crafting materials that can actually be quite difficult to get at times. The Scorchbeast Queen event, Scorched Earth, definitely helps speed up the process. But then Bethesda released Wastelanders, which drastically changed what Fallout 76's endgame is. Now, this shift in the endgame is really what helped make Fallout 76's endgame really unique, because it was a shift away from actually doing events and dungeon-like things into where you were more focused on just specifically one part of the reward that you get from completing that content. Now, what I'm talking about is the gold bullion and legendary script. And the reason why this is really unique is because a part of what makes endgame content in other games is the difficulty of the content. The things such as the dungeons or the expeditions in New World or the dungeons in World of Warcraft. There was some form of difficulty to completing the content that was a part of the reward in and of itself, was completing the difficult content. Now, Wastelanders just completely turned it on its head for Fallout 76 and made it where it was more so that you were just needing to log in every day, and that's the most important part. Now, when it comes to Fallout 76 as a whole, for many people on the outside looking in, Fallout 76 seems like a cash grab by Bethesda. And this addition of script and legendary modules and the gold bullion all seems like a way to increase the daily amount of players playing the game, which in hopes means that more people are spending money on things like Fallout First or stuff that's in the Atomic Shop. Now, the reason why this all matters at all when it comes to Fallout 76's endgame is because, as I was previously mentioning, is that the content, the stuff that you're completing to get the rewards, doesn't actually matter. Like, you can go around the world, complete any of the events, regardless of difficulty, to get the legendary script, and to get the legendary weapons to turn into script, and the gold bullion. It doesn't actually matter how hard the content is. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Daily Ops. Daily Ops and Expeditions both are a great way to get legendary weapons, which you can turn into legendary script, and then you can turn that script into modules, which you can use to craft legendary weapons and the effects that you want for those weapons. Now, this is really all just a long-winded way of saying that Fallout 76's endgame is whack. It's more so just about you completing your daily tasks, instead of it actually being about completing the content. Like, as you can see in the video right now, beating the Scorch Beast on your own looks like it'd be incredibly difficult. And it would actually be meaningful endgame content if that was the peak of it. But instead, you have everyone that can participate in the whole entire world. It can participate in this event with you and make it tenfold easier. Now, I don't think that they should make it so that the Scorch Beast Queen event is one that is done solo, because I do think that it's one of the many ways to get the community together, which is something that Fallout 76 tends to struggle with. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Fallout 76's community as a whole is a very welcoming, nice, and enjoyable community, but when it comes to actually participating in events and stuff together, you know, more people are focused on what they can do individually to get to where they need to get, instead of focusing on doing things as a whole. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, you only really need to be worried about the stuff that pertains to you, and going around and completing some of these low-level events isn't necessarily in everyone's best interest. But that is a part of why I think Bethesda went the route that they did when it came to the end game in Fallout 76, because of the fact that they didn't want you to have to rely on other players to go forward with your progression. When you look at a game like New World, it requires you to have, at the bare minimum, of 3 other players for you to go in and complete their equivalent of dungeons. Now, the main issue with that for someone like me is I'm a primary solo player, and when I do play, I usually play with maybe at most 1 or 2 friends. Now, if I was playing with 2 friends, I could go through and complete the dungeon in a game like New World, but the difficulty in there is much, much higher, and that means that I'm more than likely have to run it with a full team of 5. So that's kind of why Fallout 76's endgame is I have mixed feelings about, because there's some things that I like and some things that I kind of just don't really make sense to me. Like, if the content isn't difficult, is it really endgame content? Because at the end of the day, this is stuff that can be completed at any level. Like, once you hit level 50 in Fallout 76, you kind of shift into the next section of the game, because you can use whatever weapons you want, you can use whatever armor you want, because everything only has a level 50 cap on it. Now, I do think that it's really nice that there is daily repeatable quests that you use to get the treasury notes and to get the legendaries, as well as events that can be completed to do the same thing as well. I just think that it's kind of interesting that instead of the content itself, like the stuff you're doing, you're more so focused on the rewards, which is understandable, but in a game like Fallout, and it does, to me, doesn't really make necessarily as much sense, because You know, especially when you've added in things like legendary crafting. Essentially, the only reason why you grind for legendaries now is to turn them into script to get the modules to craft the stuff you want, to have a better chance than to go through the rent, like waiting for the game to give you something unique. Now, again, I don't think Fallout 76's endgame is bad by any stretch of the imagination. I just think it's really unique, and it's really different than what a lot of games tend to try and do when it comes to their endgame content, especially when it comes to MMORPGs, where we've definitely seen a shift into a more let's do this stuff together type of thing. I do think Fallout has done tons of good and have made tons of steps into the right direction of trying to kind of get the game to a place where it's a lot less buggy, there's a lot more content to do, but they've ultimately fallen short of my expectations, purely due to the fact that none of the content is actually difficult. Now, there's ways to make it difficult if you want to go ahead and put handicaps on yourself, such as going through and completing daily ops on your own with no armor and non-legendary weapons. Sure, you know, you have ways to make the content difficult, but, you know, instead of being able to use the best and still have challenges, they've instead made it to where, you know, you use the best and you waltz right through all this content. Ultimately, I do like the legendary crafting. I do like the ability to go ahead and buy these super good plans with gold bullion. I just wish that the content itself was more difficult, and in turn, it would be more rewarding for the community as a whole to actually, you know, complete this stuff. And it would also entice people to actually do that stuff together instead of purely focusing on what you can do individually. Like, while I was recording content for the background footage of this video, I launched a nuke, and immediately following my nuke being launched, someone else goes right behind me and launches a nuke as well to trigger the event again, knowing that people are going to participate in it, which is exactly what you would want to see in Fallout 76, which has been a game that has been very up and down in the amount of players it has. But this is kind of where the game shifts, is where this content requires you to play the game daily. And in order to actually make it farther into the game, you have to have things like Fallout First. Having the addition of the scrap box is extremely useful, and almost a necessity at this point because of all the rewards that are being gotten from these events. Now, I could do a video all on its own about Fallout First and how I feel about it, but ultimately, I think this is where I'm going to leave this one off at. I do hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I really appreciate you guys watching or listening to my rambling and ranting about this game. Ultimately, I do love Fallout 76, and it's a game I'm going to continue to play. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it.